Okay, I'm going to show you how one way to get a model into Ecotect. And for the purpose of this exercises and many to follow, we'll be using a model that you're going to generate yourselves based on your own apartments or your homes or your houses that you live in London. So here is my home. I'm going to tell you where it is, but I will tell you a little bit about it. I live at the end of a terrace which was bombed during the Second World War, so my house is the last house that survived the bombing, which is why it looks a bit chopped off. The house that I've modelled, I live on the ground floor of an apartment, so I have modelled both floors, and I've done so to a level of detail which I would say is relevant to the kind of work we're going to be doing when we bring this into Ecotect. So what's important? You need to model your homes to a level of accuracy that is relevant. So that means if I show you how I've built this model, so we start at the very outside. I've built this in Rhino. You can do this in lots of other modeling tools, but I'm assuming most of you are based in Rhino, in which case this is going to be the most relevant one. So I've started and I've built the surrounding buildings to a level of detail which I believe to be necessary, and that means for exercises that we'll be doing looking at the sun or looking at shadows or looking at the relation of buildings to my building, I've just drawn those buildings which do actually have a direct relationship, those that are in front of me, those that are behind me, and those that are to the left of me. And I've done that, I think, to a level of detail which is no more than massing. I've then made separate layers, and you should do the same. So surrounding buildings was one layer. I've then done, if you look here, the internal configuration of my building. So I'll turn off that. So I've built the inside of my building as a series of boxes which contain each room. And again, I've done this for a very deliberate reason. So when we get into Ecotect, you'll understand why this is the way I've chosen to do it. But again, the level of detail is extremely simple. I've just shown walls, I've shown floors, I've shown ceilings. Particularly, I've shown window reveals. That is the depth of the window, which is very important. Then moving on, externally, obviously, I've shown all the external walls, and again, I've modelled to a level of detail which I think is relevant. So I've modelled things like window thicknesses. I've modelled strange little things that I've built, and I've modelled these as one layer. So when I combine the internal and the external, if I combine the internal and the external, you'll see how that relationship figures. I've got my internal rooms, I've got my external volume. And then the last one I've made as a separate layer is the glass. I always do the glass in a separate layer, and you'll see why. So I turn on the glass. I don't have that many windows, but what I use. And so that is a third layer I've put in. So putting all those guys together, I've got the surrounding buildings, the glass, the internal walls, and the external walls. And that's the level of detail I think you should try and aim for in your model. Nothing more really. Okay, so having set up a model, I'm now going to show you how I export that model into Ecotect. There are lots of ways you can do this through different softwares, and if you're using a BIM software like ArchiCAD, it allows you to do it actually in a much more efficient way. But for the time being, I think most students use Rhino rather than BIM, so I think we'll do it this way, and you can by all means find a better way or a different way of doing it. So because we've got lots of layers, we're going to do them individually. So I'm going to turn off each layer in turn. I'm just going to export one at a time. Here's the first one, the surrounding. Select File, Export Selected, and I'm going to export it as, I'm going to give it a name, Surrounding. I export it to 3ds, and when I do that it asks me how detailed I want. For this, somewhere in the middle is fine. It's not a very complex model at all. And I'm going to do that for each in turn, turning off and then exporting each one. So this is exporting external walls, and then we'll do internal walls. And finally I'm going to do my glass. So here we are in Ecotect. Ecotect obviously a different format to Rhino, but a very, very simple tool. So we're going to import the three different 3DS models that we've exported from Rhino. To do that, File, Import 3D CAD Geometry. You press that, you get a second window here, which has various options, none of which you particularly need to concern yourselves with at the moment. I'm going to press Choose File and then go back to where I had four individual 3DS files. Let's do it in the order that we exported them, surrounding first. We can have a look at it as a model here, just to make sure it's the right one. I'm going to import it now. Because it's all one layer, it doesn't matter a lot of these, but I can, as I say, if you're coming from bin, I could right click and I could set the zone by the item name if the export allowed you to do that. In Rhino we haven't really done that, so that's just for bin people. But let's just import into existing. In it comes, and again if I go to visualize and I press this button here, which is fit grid to objects, I will see it come in. Quite triangulated, but never mind that at the moment. Now I'm going to keep doing that for the other four. I'm going to do external walls, then I'm going to do the glass, important to existing, then I shall do the internal walls, important to existing, and then finally I'm going to do the external walls, which I think is the only one to do, important to existing. Now I have got inside Ecotect the model which I had in Rhino, with one big difference: lots of triangulations. Handy to get rid of those triangulations. Let's let Ecotect do that. If I click on 3D Editor, which gets me inside the model, now each of the four layers I've imported have a different color, because within Ecotect they're a different layer. I can see those layers by pressing here, my layers, and the layers are the same names I had in Rhino: surrounding, glass, internal walls, and external walls. I'm going to select everything now, and I'm going to remove those triangles, which is a very simple thing. To press Modify and this Merge Coincident Triangles. So I'm going to click that, and Ecotect is a wee thing, and then does a fairly dramatic cleanup of all those lines which were coincident. It's still a bit of stuff, odd lines which aren't great, but for the time being that'll do us okay. So we're going to just leave that as is. One thing we are going to do, though, is we're going to make sure that the materials have a certain material quality to them. And for the time being, the only material I'm going to be interested in is I want to make sure the glass is transparent. So we know that the Ecotect has different layers because I imported them in that way. So I'm going to make the glass layer the current one. I'm going to double click on it to make it current. And when it's current, obviously it's the one that's highlighted, but if you press F4 it will then isolate just that layer. So if you go back to visualize, you can see that that's the layer that's just been isolated, just the glass. Now what I want to do is I want to actually make those elements into glass. At the moment Ecotect thinks they're solid, so I'm just going to select them all and I'm going to make them into a glass. This black and white checkered flag is the thing that tells you the material property. At the moment it tells me it's assumed various material qualities, but I'm going to click on that. I'm just going to make the window into a window. Now in actual fact in my house they're slightly different, but I'm just going to make a very simple assumption now, make everything double glazed timber frame. Double click that. When I double click that, it gives me a whole load of material qualities which as we go in other exercises will become relevant, but for the time being the only thing I'm looking for is transparency, and transparency is because I want to see inside the rooms in a visual way. So we're not going to say much about this other than it exists. And having set that material, and when I go into visualize, I can now see through these windows. If I want to turn back up on the other layers, if I press F4, it now turns back on. Those layers are turned off, and you can now see that I can see inside those windows, such as they are. The next very important thing we want to make sure we know is the orientation of my house. Now, orientation is going to be really critical in terms of relationship between the sun and my home. So obviously we've got to get the climate right first. Well, Ecotect always seems to import the southern hemisphere climate, Australia. I don't live in Australia, so I'm going to have to pick a climate which is relevant. So I'm going to go down to UK Heathrow. That'll do fine. I'll click that. As with our first exercise, if I want to see my my house with respect to the sun, that is there and available by clicking the daily sun path here. But what I want to make sure is that I'm actually pointing the right direction. So what I'm going to have a look at is I'm going to have a look at my house in plan. To press plan view, I press F5. And I'm going to have a look at this thing which is called project. And project gives me the reference of the project. It's longitude, latitude. That is now latitude and longitude is London, which is correct. Now my house actually faces about 10 degrees off north. I don't quite face north-south, almost, but I'm going to type in 10 degrees here. I figured that out by literally looking at Google Maps, so you can use Google Maps here to find out the same things. That's kind of handy. And then I press again back into 3D editor, and I now see my whole sun has cranked by 10 degrees, which is what I inputted here in the project file. Which means when I go to visualize, and I click now on the other F keys, F8 gets me back to perspective. It means now that the position of the sun relative to my house is now correct. So when I turn on the shadows, as display shadows, that is actually the shadows that will be cast in terms of the position of the sun. Right, that is how, for this exercises that are about to follow, that is how we get Ecotect models into Ecotect from Rhino.